CJ, thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely.
I want to start with suck it up culture, which we hear a lot about. Can you explain how it's not actually brave and it just sucks for a lot of the people on the teams, and what that looks like in business when it's actually played out?
Well, I think when you think about suck it up, I call it suck it up syndrome. And suck it up syndrome can be an individual, it can be a team, if it's a culture, it's really about a whole entire company having expectations of people just doing the job. There is no real care of the people, there's no genuine care, there's not even greater good of what's right for the company. Suck it up syndrome, any of us can work more hours, do more things, and get more done in periods of time. But when someone is doing it, just sucking it up and on the wheel, rolling, just doing, eventually they're going to fall apart. And if they as an individual fall apart, odds are the team's going to fall apart. Consequently, that culture is terrible. And when you have a culture of a leadership team that thinks that way, drives that way, that culture will implode at some point.
And how have you addressed business leaders who you might see some of this suck it up culture in their teams, and how do you kind of put a stop to it or get them to acknowledge that this is not going to work for very much longer?
Right, so one of the things that I teach when I'm with my teams in the room is I teach them what we call the capacity ball. And if you think about your time, your seat that you own, the job that you own, we all have a container of time. So is that container of time 40 hours a week, 50 hours a week? And if your job is meant to be 50 hours a week, which on average that is most of our jobs, right? But you do this capacity ball and you think about this, and someone 70% of their time is doing their job, and of course we have rocks and bigger things that we do. The capacity ball, when someone all of a sudden is working 60 hours a week or 70 hours a week and they're just sucking it up, trying to do all of these things, I draw this picture of this balloon exploding all over the place, right? Because it is. Eventually what's going to happen is it's going to pop and everyone's going to freak out, and then things will really be a harder suck it up culture.
So what do you tell business leaders? How do they start changing the tide in their companies? Is it more just being deliberate, attention to their people, solving different problems?
So it goes right back to our accountability chart. So what is the right structure for the business? And when you look at every single seat that you have, do we have the right seats that the business needs to grow? And then allowing people to stay within their container of time. They will produce better, they'll think better, they'll help the teams be better. So it really starts right back to the right structure. And then of course making sure that you have the right people in the seats. But it starts with the leadership team. The leadership team has to be willing to do the best thing for the business, the greater good of the business, which of course ties right back to that VTO, the Vision Traction Organizer, that we help them build.
So do you think it's about leadership style as well, or do you think it's more about using the tools the right way?
I would say it's a combination of both. I think that if people have a commitment to using the tools and using the tools well, and they're willing to provide genuine care and concern, and when I say that, I don't mean it's all nicey nice or all lovey lovey, because sometimes genuine care and concern is tough conversations. But they have to be willing to be open, honest, and vulnerable. That's the hardest thing, I think, in the very beginning to teach a leadership team.
I want to talk a little bit about identifying team culture problems, because this is what you do for a living and you're in the room a lot. So what's the number one way, or what's something that triggers for you that there is a team culture problem in a leadership team? And how do you go about changing that?
It actually starts oftentimes in the very beginning. The first day we have what we call the focus day. That's building out their accountability chart for the first time, asking them to go up here and look down at the business, think about the business. The debates that are happening, the bake-offs that happen on seats, it starts uncovering unhealthy things right out of the gate. And then they walk out of that and they're like, whew, survived. Then they come back in for vision building day one, and all of a sudden now they have to build, they're building core values. And then you tie the seat with the values to put the right person in the right seat, and it uncovers a lot. I've recently had a couple of situations where I had a bake-off, And one of the person, to be named nameless, ultimately said, if I don't have that seat, I'm not going to be on this leadership team, and I'm not even going to be in this company. I kind of spun on a dime and I said, are you threatening them? And he looks up at me and he got a little pale and he goes, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say it that way. And so you start getting real. You start getting people to be real and raw. And actually, something like that appears to be conflict, it really opens it up and they are able to break through a ceiling with that.
It's interesting because you're not saying like, oh, you need to address people this way, or you need to change your leadership style, or you need to change the conversations in the room. It's just the process of EOS actually just uncovers it all by itself. And
people are real. We're all human and they'll show up eventually.
This is maybe a tough question, but it kind of goes back to the EOS process. But on average, if you're seeing some of these cultural issues on a team, how long is it taking people to kind of flesh them out and start turning around and righting the ship? And maybe it is just through the EOS process, or maybe it takes way longer than that.
Well, having done this almost 14 years now, I have seen teams come together and all of a sudden they look in the mirror and they see the light bulbs and they change actually pretty quickly. I've seen it happen in 2-3 quarters. Quickly, they bond together. In a year's time, we almost always add a person to the leadership team or someone leaves the leadership team. So that's on average happens. I have teams that it has taken years. I mean years. I have some of my teams I've been with for 13 years, and some of them, it literally has taken 10 years for that one person. And you can't force it. As an implementer, I need to meet them where they're at, and I teach them the tools, and I lean in to facilitate, and I coach. But at the end of the day, they need to make those decisions for themselves. It's their business.
10 years is a long time.
It is a long time, but it's true.
Talk to me about hiring a little bit. When you, what's your philosophy for hiring, and how do you coach some of your clients to hire?
Sure. I mean, I spent almost 30 years in the placement industry, so I've had always this philosophy of hire slow and fire fast. Now, it's not so much about time. What I mean by hiring slow is being purposeful with your hiring. Use the tool People Analyzer is our tool, meaning look at your core values. Are these people matching your core values? And then you look at the seat, and are they GWCing that seat? Do they get the seat? Do they want the seat? Do they have the capacity, mental, physical, emotional, spiritual skill, capacity to do that seat? And as long as those answers are yes, and as long as they're fitting your values, that's definitely a first step to utilizing to make sure you're getting the right people. Now, we also use Colby as one of our tools in EOS, and so I encourage many of my teams to use Colby as one of the steps in the process of hiring as well. I encourage more than one person to interview the person they're hiring to see how they show up with different people. So what I mean by hire slow is be deliberate, use your tools. In today's market, sometimes you have to do that in a faster time frame that you want, but don't skip your steps.
And what do you mean by fire fast?
Fire fast is oftentimes what happens is we have someone, even a new hire, and we realize quickly they're not going to work out. I encourage a leader to start coaching, managing that person, and realizing that's not a good fit, and not have them stay in that seat for any length of time when it's a newer hire, because it just obviously isn't going to work. But there are people that have been in seats for a very, very long time, and those seats become too big and those seats become too small. So you really need to balance where a person is at. Sometimes they get stressed out by a seat and they're not able to function well. Sometimes they simply get bored in a seat and they're still not functioning well. So I encourage to have those deep conversations with that employee to help them be their best and see if they can get them to improve. But it becomes very clear when someone isn't fitting your values or GWCing the seat. They are not a good match for your business. And that's what I mean by fire fast. Watch it a quarter. Start having the conversations. But it happens often where someone has been in a business 10 years, 20 years, and they've always not been the right person. And everyone likes to just leave it lay and drag it out.
And what's the cost to a team or a company when you're hanging on to someone who doesn't belong in a seat?
Actually, there are a lot of statistics out there that would say a certain person staying in a seat at a certain level can cost you $200,000. So there is an actual monetary cost to keeping that, but then there is the intangible costs that you don't have price tag to, so to speak, or culture. They have affected so many people around them because maybe they're toxic, and that's just not helping the team or the company.
Is there anything else that you want to touch on about your experience about writing the book that a big takeaway that you can share with people, maybe a tip that you think is going to help people, leadership teams especially, right away?
Sure. Writing the book was just this amazing experience, and a lot of people have said to us, 3 authors? But we just fed off of each other. Kelly, Mark, and I all fed off of each other. And then when you really got to the storytelling, we'd come up with a concept, and then we each had our different stories about it. So I think the storytelling, people will resonate with some of those examples that we've put in the book, and they'll go, oh, that's my story, or a very similar story. The biggest thing about this book, Dare to Build an Intentional Culture, it's that. I dare you. I dare you to be big and bold and go build that intentional culture, because we don't all do things intentionally. We think we are, but we're not. But it's capable. We can all do it.
So there's an equation in the book about greater good. Can you tell me what that equation is?
Absolutely. Greater good equals every single word of the VTO multiplied by genuine care and concern.
And what does that mean to you when you're thinking about that equation?
Well, I have a personal story. There was a July afternoon, and Kelly and I scheduled a call. Kelly scheduled a call with me, and Kelly had to have a tough conversation with me. Kelly wasn't getting what she needed from me in the seat that she needed. She needed someone to be working 50 hours a week to be able to do the seat to its best on her leadership team. I was not able to give her those hours, and I wasn't able to give her the hours, and I didn't want to. I love being an implementer, but it was a very tough conversation simply because I love being on that leadership team. I love contributing. EOS meant the world to me. And so we finished the conversation, and the decision was we would tell the leadership team at the next L10 I would be transitioning out. I got off that call, and I was sick. I felt very hurt. I felt very upset. I picked up the phone, I called Mike Payton, and I bawled my eyes out. Fast forward, it was the right decision. It was the best decision for the greater good of the business. And you know what? I learned a lot from it.
And that was Kelly and you showing.
She had genuine care and concern for me. She was direct in what she said, but it was never harsh. It was never hurtful. It was always caring about me. Mm-hmm. I've always known she loves me. I've always known she loves me. Yeah. And I love her back. And so yes, fast forward, here we are writing this people book together.
Well, thank you. Thanks for talking about the book with me.
Absolutely. So appreciate it. Thank you.